Hello, Cam followers. Both me and Andrea are in the dark today. Andrea is joining us from her home, which is lovely. I'm afraid I'm still at work, so I'm in a dark consult room somewhere in Cornwall. But we have got the lovely Andrea here tonight to talk to us about something that I feel is really, really important people understand. Because what we need to do is make sure people are equipped to make the right decisions, sensible decisions, rather than get caught up in a flurry of other people's opinions and experiences and anecdotal stories. So the aim of tonight is to try and help you understand about adverse event likelihoods, profiles, how they're reported, to give you confidence to work with your vet with regards using medications. Now, before I let Andrea introduce herself, I'm just going to do a blatant plug of something I haven't plugged for a while, which is a book that I wrote. Oh no! So the story behind this is quite funny, actually. I was in Moscow and I messed up my visa and I couldn't come home. I had to sit in an airport for 24 hours, silently crying. And I decided that I needed to write a children's book about recognizing the signs of pain in dogs, having put many, many dogs to sleep because they bit someone. I've been a vet for 20 years. I'm sad to say it's a very common scenario. And the lovely bit about this story is I approached a guy called Phil Nibbs, who did the Holly's Army logo, and asked if he would illustrate it for me. It took 2 years to illustrate it right at the time, and not a penny did he charge cash, because he believes so strongly we need to get this information out there to the public. Now, this book is available. It is now translated into Dutch and German. It's to be translated into every language in the world. And we want you to purchase this and take it to libraries and primary schools and brownies and cubs and whatever you can think of, because it's a really important topic. So make my Christmas, guys. Please go to the Cam shop and purchase said book and tell everybody about it. Blatant plug. I'm so sorry, Andrea. Totally rude.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
Please introduce yourself. Tell everybody what you do so that everybody has faith in what you say.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. I hope you're sitting somewhere warm, if not dark. I suppose it's really cold, actually, this evening, isn't it? I'm feeling cold here. I've got a rug on my knees. Anyway, my name's Andrea Tarr. I'm a pharmacist. If anybody, I don't know if everybody knows what a pharmacist is. Pharmacist is a sort of a specialist in medicines. Pharmacists have sort of a very broad knowledge of medicines, about how they work, their uses, all the regulations around them. We have a sort of a 5-year study, university and practical year, and it's a regulated profession. You're probably most familiar with pharmacists in the high street pharmacy, but pharmacists work in kind of a wide variety of roles. I myself started off in the NHS in a hospital nearly 40 years ago now, and I specialised very early on in medicines information, which means I'm a specialist in sort of interpreting sort of evidence and information about medicines and presenting it in a way that can be used by people who make decisions about medical treatments. So I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry as well, in medicines information. Also, I did a short bit of time in sales, so I know how they sell medicines. But for a big part of my career, most of my career actually, I worked on an independent medical publication that produced independent advice for doctors about medicines. And about 10 years ago, I founded a similar publication, online publication, which is independent for vets, because vets face the kind of similar sort of challenges to doctors. They need to keep up with the evidence of medicines, with new medicines. They have the challenges of dealing with pharmaceutical promotion and so on. And vets and doctors are really, really busy people. And so, they need somebody who can help them make sense of all the information. And in fact, information, particularly on veterinary medicines, is kind of all over the place. Vets have to deal with licensed medicines, human medicines. and things are changing all the time, and it's complicated. So the publication that I run is called Veterinary Prescriber. It's online. It's independent of the pharmaceutical industry and everybody else, and it's available to veterinary professionals on subscription.
So let me tell you how wonderful this lady is. You do need to go and look at Veterinary Prescriber. It's a fantastic resource. And we met many years back at BSAVA when I was just starting out and you were quite new to the VP. And we immediately got on because we're both very headstrong at remaining independent and trying our best to get valid data out to the people that need it. So we really align well. So Andrea is actually one of our advisors. So Cam is very blessed to have 17 global advisors, and these are specialists in their fields. And Andrea is one of them. She's also on our ethics committee and keeps me very much on the straight and narrow, making the right decisions for you Cam followers. So she has a very big role in Cam, and I'm always grateful for her time. So tonight, we're going to be talking about adverse events because it's a very hot topic. It's always there. It's always in the background. People are always worrying about it. And a lot of discussion is needed to clear up some issues with the way that people talk about them. So I think, first of all, we need to really clarify the term adverse event. What does it mean?
Well, I'd say another term that can be used is unwanted effect, because when you use a medicine, we're using it for the particular benefit. So that might be pain relief or sedation or reducing blood pressure or whatever it is. But medicines can also have unwanted effects, and they are sometimes also called adverse effects or side effects or adverse reactions or adverse drug reactions. They all kind of mean the same, or adverse event. So there's something that you don't want the drug to do. An adverse, we'll call them adverse effects tonight or whatever. We might change between the different terms. And adverse effects can range from being very minor, they don't really matter, very trivial, to very serious, things like seizures, birth defects, death, and so on. So there's a massive range of seriousness, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think it was quite useful that someone once said to me years ago, to do work, to affect the body in a functional way, it is understandable that there can be adverse events, side effects, because
if something's doing something in the body, it's going to be doing something else. I mean, the whole thing about medicines is that when you take a medicine to relieve a pain in your head, I mean, the medicine isn't just going to your head, it's going everywhere in the body, carried in the bloodstream. And bodies are really complicated. First of all, we don't know everything about how drugs work. We study, we're learning more and more all the time. They're studied and we find that they interact with particular receptors or affect particular chemicals in the body. But we don't know everything about, where all those receptors are, or sometimes drugs act with a particular part of the body, but there's another part of the body that the drug will interact with, but it'll have a different effect there. So everything is so complex that we can't know precisely usually what is going on. So that's why we always have to be alert and be aware of the possibility of adverse effects. And that is
not to use them. It's not there to say don't use it. It's there to say get all your eggs in your basket, check, is it the right species? Is it the right condition? Is it the right circumstance? Is it the right frequency? Is it the right dose? Is it the right, port of administration? All of this needs to be taken into account to make sure.
But there's somebody doing that job for us. That isn't, a vet doesn't have to work out all those really complicated things because we have a regulatory agency. And that's what regulation of medicines is all about. It's to make sure that the medicines that are available to us, that the benefit of them outweighs the risk overall. And that's what the regulatory authority is doing, finding that out. And if something is more risky than is worth taking for the benefit, then it doesn't get licensed. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really valid point to say, medications are not like that light switch in the bathroom. Everybody has the ping pong light switch. You just pull it and it turns the light on, you ping it and it turns the light off, and done. There's no complications. It's just one thing it does. Drugs are very different to that. But I needed to also say, so are naturopathic, so are herbs, so are nutraceuticals, so is hands-on therapies, so is food, so is life. It isn't going to have one effect on your body. I just want to make that clear, because drugs can get thrown into a bad light when actually the same principles apply with everything, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So there
absolutely.
you go.
You can be exercising and fall over and break your leg. So, that's an adverse effect of exercise.
I'm never going to exercise again in my life. If that is a risk, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. So something that I didn't realize until quite recently, and that's because I hadn't really read around the topic, is that broad umbrella of adverse events, side effects, that are listed, etc., or acknowledged, don't actually have to be associated with the medication. Can you explain how all of these things that happen in the same timeline as a medication being given will get lumped together like a car boot sale into this happened after this was given? Do we know if it's linked? Not sure, but explain that for people.
Do you mean how do you know if a drug is causing an adverse effect?
Oh no, I mean, so when you read about adverse events, that doesn't necessarily mean it's directly associated with the drug. It's a temporal thing, So we have it quite a lot in the vet world, where say you put a dog onto a non-steroidal, and then within a week to 2 weeks, it develops mild, moderate diarrhea. And there's that utter belief it must be related to the non-steroidal, but actually it was a coincidence. The dog had eaten something in the park. But that will get noted as a potential adverse event.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes, that's right. Because you can't, with an individual animal, you can never not usually be absolutely certain that a drug has caused an adverse effect, because, as you say, it could be coincidence, it could be the underlying disease. Quite often, if a dog is having more than one medication, it's usually impossible to know which one is causing the adverse effect. But shall we talk about how the information about adverse effects of medicines is collected, is discovered? Maybe that would make a bit more sense. So it all starts with, so if pharmaceutical company wants to market a medicine, a veterinary medicine, they first of all have to get a marketing authorization or product license from the regulator, which in the UK is the Veterinary Medicines Directorate. A company can't just put a veterinary medicine on the market without that; it would be illegal. And in order to get a marketing authorization, they have to do all the trials and so on, and tests which prove its quality in the first place, which prove that it does what they say it's going to do. Has the benefit that that they claim it will have, and also that it's got acceptable safety. Nothing is completely safe. You can never say that a drug is safe, any drug. So they have to do clinical trials and all kinds of tests to create all that data, which the regulator then examines. And then what the regulator is doing is looking at all the information and making a judgment about whether overall the benefit outweighs the risk, the chance of any sort of harm. And they're doing that. I mean, it depends as well. That judgment depends to some extent on what disease you're treating. So for a very serious disease, like cancer, for example, a higher risk of harm is usually more acceptable than if you're treating, a much less severe disease. It wouldn't. So for a cancer drug, it's kind of acceptable that, a person's hair will fall out and it causes extreme nausea, but that wouldn't be acceptable for a drug that you were just taking. Yeah. And all that, a huge amount of evidence is all collected together and is summarized, because the marketing authorization itself isn't actually a published thing, but all the information is summarized in a legal document called the Summary of Product Characteristics, or SPC, which people have probably heard of. And the SPC is always a standard format for every licensed medicine. And there's a section in there called section number 4.6, and that's the section that contains the information about adverse effects. And so they'll summarize in there the adverse effects that were reported in the clinical trials. So that's based on clinical trials in, a few hundred animals usually. So they'll say, these. So when the clinical trials are happening, the researchers will note what adverse effects were seen, and they might be, there'll be adverse effects they can see, but they'll also usually do laboratory tests, and see what happens to liver enzymes and blood cells and that kind of thing. And that's all summarized in the SPC, and that also forms the basis for the package leaflet that comes with a medicine that the pet
all
owners.
Those adverse events in those trials, have they definitely linked that dog with diarrhea or that dog that vomited? It was definitely the drug, or was it just these events happened whilst these dogs were in the trial?
Well, in clinical trials, side effects are usually reported as likely to be related to the treatment or unlikely to. So it depends. Different trials can report things in different ways sometimes. But I'm not a clinical trials expert, so I have seen things reported in this way as definitely related or unrelated and so on. So they'll say something like, 10% of dogs. And sorry, I should also say that the trials are usually half the dogs will be on the trial drug, half the dogs will be usually on a placebo. So they're also looking at the difference between what happened to the dogs on placebo compared with the dogs that were taking the test drug. So, and usually, some dogs on placebo will have diarrhea as well or whatever. So they're looking for differences between the placebo and the trial drug, and it's really kind of looking at, well, that is what is reported in the SPC then. So they'll say, look, 10% of dogs had diarrhea, but when you're getting to smaller numbers, the kind of statistical significance of that is a bit more difficult. I mean, the thing is that what's important to know is that what we know at the stage at which a drug first comes on the market is what its apparent safety is, because the trials before marketing are done in kind of a relatively small number of dogs, really, usually a few hundred. So, for example, Librela, which came onto the market last year, that the clinical trials, the dogs with osteoarthritis that were included in the trials numbered, 550 or so. And with that sort of number, you're only going to pick up the most common adverse effects. That isn't enough.
And people need to know that that's a big trial for the vet sector. I read papers where there was 8 dogs.
Well, that's right. Yes. Well, the clinical trials that in which the sort of the drugs that are being marketed, the size of those clinical trials is usually sort of 200 250, something like that. So I think in this one there were 2 trials of that size, adding up to about 500. But you're right, outside of that, you look at any other trials, you're lucky if you get 20 dogs in a trial. So, and that isn't going to be big enough to be able to pick up anything except the most common effects. So anyway, so I wanted to go on and tell you a bit more about the sort of standard communication about adverse effects in the product literature. So they list adverse effects according to how commonly they were seen, and there's a sort of standard terminology for describing that. So they'll be described as very common, which means they occurred in more than 1 in 10 dogs, or common, or uncommon, or rare, or very rare, which is fewer than 1 in 10,000 dogs. And what they're reporting on is what is seen in the trials. And together with that information, the SPC will also contain information to help avoid adverse effects as well. So there'll be the contraindication section, which means, don't use the drug in these types of animals. And there's the precaution section, which says, use with care in these animals, and use with a lower dose maybe. So, for instance, for meloxicam, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, so the typical adverse effects they see with that, things like loss of appetite, vomiting, diarrhea, sometimes you can get gastric bleeding. So the contraindication is don't use in dogs with gastrointestinal disorders. So, it's kind of a sensible course of action. So the information in the SPC is there to try and help vets know, when more care is needed, and it's there to help avoid the occurrence of adverse effects as far as possible.
Yeah. But that SPC isn't there for life, though, is it?
No, it isn't. That's what we know about the drug when a drug first comes on the market. And that's why continuous monitoring after that is really essential. And that's another kind of positive thing about medicines. Because medicines are regulated, once they come on the market, we don't just sort of forget about them then. They are monitored for forever, for the whole of the time they're on the market. That's in one of the jobs of the regulatory authority, the Veterinary Medicines Directorate in this country, is to monitor the safety of medicines so that we can continue to learn about them. Because it is a sort of a bit of a trade-off, because if we waited until we had very much more evidence, so we could completely know the safety profile of every drug, then that would mean having to wait probably a very long time before a drug came onto the market. So it is a bit of a trade-off, but it does mean that we don't know everything about the adverse effect profile of a new medicine when it first comes on the market. And that's why this continuing monitoring is so important. And as I say, it's a job that's done by the regulator, and also the manufacturer. It's a legal responsibility for them to monitor safety.
Yeah. So how often do you think an SPC would be updated? What's the frequency there?
Well, the veterinary medicine. There used to be like sort of periodic sort of examinations of the side effect information, but I understand now it's moving more to a sort of a continuous monitoring. So what happens with the monitoring? It relies very much on vets and other people reporting adverse effects that they have seen to the manufacturer or to the regulator. The manufacturer then, if they go to the manufacturer, they're then passed on to the regulator. And what the regulator does, they look at every adverse effect report that comes in, and they try, if they can, they try to get more information about it to try to understand and make a judgment about how likely it is to be, a cause and effect. very often they're working on very kind of scant data that people send in, which makes it very difficult. So, and and they are monitoring those and kind of analyzing them on a sort of a monthly basis, and they're looking for signals. So changes that are made to the SPC, they don't happen on a sort of a regular basis. They happen when it becomes clear that a change is needed. So that might be, I don't know, probably, I mean, look, is one example I can think of that I looked at the history of how often changes happened, and there was sort of something new every year. That's probably quite a lot, sort of a change. So for this one particular drug I'm thinking of, a change about once a year over about 6 years. But I think that's quite a high frequency, actually. It's probably not that often.
It really relies on people reporting, and
Absolutely.
there's a big problem in the system, and everybody kind of is aware of it. It's a human error.
Yeah.
Is that as a drug has been around for longer, the likelihood of reporting adverse events wanes because people become complacent. So if you had a new drug on the market, say Librela, you will have a flurry of data come in because it's new, it's novel, people are more observant, people are more likely to report. It's just human nature. But when you've got an older drug, say meloxicam, people, it's been around for years and people become very complacent about reporting related events. Again, I'm just going to clarify. At the stage that something gets reported by a vet or a member of public, it's an association event rather than a related event. And I think we just need to make that really clear is if I have a dog come in and it develops diarrhea within 2 weeks of me starting the medication, I personally cannot say it definitely was linked, but I can certainly report it. And if they found out after thousands and thousands of inputs that really does happen quite often, the likelihood there is an association. But I think there's a tendency for us humans to go, well, it definitely is. It's like mine. And it's not, is it?
No, that's right. I think it can happen the other way as well. I think people can not report because they're not really sure and they doubt whether it is, where they probably, it is worth reporting, even if there's doubt, because as you say, it's sort of building up the picture that building up the overall picture that the person seeing all these reports in one place can make sense of it. You can't necessarily make sense of it in the case of one animal, but putting it all together, everyone's experience, then that's when you can.
Then the figures add up more, isn't it? The same as a drug trial. 100 dogs in a drug trial is never going to be as good as a drug trial with 100,000 dogs.
Absolutely.
So data is key. Now you made a little comment about something that is very relevant, and it does stop vets reporting. Is it can be a bit time consuming, laborious getting all the data down, and it's a necessity. But when you're busy and the day is absolutely jam packed, and then you've got to fill in a long-winded questionnaire, it can take less of a priority, which is a shame. And what is extremely cool is that owners can report too. So it's a collaborative approach between vet and owner. It's not all onus is on the veterinary professional. And it'd be lovely. I'd love this if an owner says to me, "Oh yeah, we got some diarrhea within 3 weeks of starting this. Do you think there's a link?" And I can say, "Well, we'll never really know, but with data, we might get somewhere in a few years. Do you fancy reporting it for me?" And then I go, "Oh, I'd love to," because it does take time, doesn't it?
Well, yes, that's right. And as you say, anybody can report. Pet owners can report adverse effects, and they can do that by if you look up the VMD on the internet, and they've on their page, there's a section which is called "Report a Problem," and you can do it that way. Yeah, and it's not just vets, by the way. Who you mentioned that there's thought to be a huge degree of underreporting of adverse effects. And I was going to say, it's not just vets, but, doctors as well are thought to, there's a huge underreporting of adverse effects on human medicines too. I know the VMD is looking at ways of trying to, make it easier for vets to report. And there are other ways that information about adverse effects can be gathered as well. There are services, research organizations like SAVSnet, and I can't remember the name of the other one at the moment. But is it one of them kind of collects sort of real-time data from veterinary practices that participate in the scheme, and so they're hoping to be able to, collect adverse event data that way, just by from what the vets are writing in the clinical notes and so on. Different ways of doing that, and then also some vets write case reports and get them published. So it's possible to pick up information about adverse events that way, and then sometimes there are clinical trials on marketed drugs then that can also provide more information about adverse.
The lovely Lynn has put a link, so if anybody wants to take notes, well done, Lynn. Exciting news is that with the new website that we have, which is continuing to be updated like an SPC is, one of the things that we will be adding to it is a pathway for owners to report if they feel that their dog's had an adverse event, and it will feed into the VMD. So we're just going to try and make it easier for you guys. That should be in the next 3 to 6 months, because at the end of the day, the more we all collectively know, the better for all of us. And, it's not trying to lay blame or point the finger or put somebody into bad repute or something. It's about actually making sure that we make the right decisions for our dogs. So please don't be, intimidated by doing it. Don't feel that your time is wasted. I think sometimes when you look at an SPC, which is the sheet of paper that comes in the pack of the drug, that folded up, it's always folded up really tight, and you pull it out, and you're like, fold it, unfold it, unfold it, unfold it, unfold it. And it's like, whoa, it's a massive sheet, and it's all black and white, tiny writing. You're like, God, I can't read it. It's too intense. I think a lot of people probably think that, it will never change. That's it. That is what it is. And why bother reporting? It is worth reporting.
Yeah, well, there are lots of changes, and every month the VMD publishes, the latest changes to the SPCs, and there are, I see those every month, and there are several, looking at over all the veterinary medicines, the ones for farm animals, the ones for companion animals, but there are like 10 or 20 changes every month to the SPCs, and the changes are mainly to adverse effects and precautions and so on. So the knowledge is building all the time.
Yeah. Is that what gets reported in the vet record?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, it's quite an intense section in the middle of the magazine.
Yes, that's right. Yes. We have a section in the Veterinary Prescriber called Medicines News, and we present it in a much more.
Yes, you do. You've got the little digital you being very lovely and polite. So, with the whole question of, well, I'm willing to report, I'd like to report, I want to be part of the bigger picture, but how do I know what has happened to me is classified as an adverse event? For example, timescale. I'm hoping that Barbara will find this answers her question. So she's asked, how long can it take before we know a certain drug will not have a side effect in that individual? So say you're a really dutiful owner and you've got your iPad out and you're ready to type in all your data. What is a kind of a boundary, a defining zone of this should be reported?
Well, there isn't a general rule, I would say, but you could find helpful guidance in the SPC, for example. So, I mentioned meloxicam earlier, and there it says, the diarrhea and so on usually happen within the first week, and they usually go away after that. So but that doesn't mean that it, might not happen after 4 weeks. There is no hard and fast rule. You can only look at, what we know and what the general pattern is.
Yeah.
So
would it be fair to say though, like say you started Incurin, for example, and within the first couple of weeks your dog has panting and vomiting and seems unsettled, you'd be like, okay, that's going to report. But if your dog had been on it successfully for 2 years and it had no problems, and then suddenly this happens, am I wrong to say that I'd be less inclined to report it?
No, I think it would be reasonable to think that it's probably not that. What else has changed? Are we thinking? Has the dose changed? It's if you've been taking something for a while, it's that. It depends what kind of. It's really hard to say. It depends. Some things, some side effects can be the result of chronic use of a drug. So, for example, a corticosteroid, can take a long time to build up the kind of, the side, the typical side effects of that. They might not happen straight away. They might happen, or some might happen earlier than others, and some will take a long time to develop.
It's a really interesting thought process of how much more we should be reporting. But it's just a bit like every service industry at the moment. We're absolutely burnt out. There's, the idea of adding 4 reports to every day because there is a slight possibility. So it's one of those things that if we could do it to perfection, I think we'd all love to. But I think there is there's a little bit of logic, isn't it? If it's temporally associated, i.e. time-wise.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that we don't have all the data. So we've done point 8. How do we find out about the adverse effect of a new drug, and how is it communicated? Why is continuous monitoring needed? I think we've covered that really quite well because it's a changing field of information. Now, this is where I start getting a little bit more Hannah's probing and pushing. In your opinion, how accurate do you feel the data is compared to the human equivalent? I.e., the vet sector is a lot smaller than the medical sector, and I would probably suggest that we work on a bit more of a skeleton framework than we would a comprehensive medical facility. At no point in my 20-year career have I ever worked in a practice where somebody has this as their job role. Remember every week to go and report all this, possible adverse events. So the likelihood is the data that comes from us is smaller. There is less. So therefore, do you feel that we are likely to have less accurate information?
Well, like you say, everything is kind of smaller in the veterinary world compared to the human world. I mean, the trials for start, 10 times as big, so you're going to discover more. But in the human world, there are the same challenges and limitations. The same problems we've just talked about. Part of the reason we know so little when a drug first comes on the market is because the trials are relatively, too small to pick up anything except the most common effects. Trials are done in a more limited range of patients, so they'll usually exclude sort of older ones, younger ones, people with multiple diseases and so on. That's the same for humans and animals, and they'll usually the trials will be relatively short term compared with the duration for which the treatment will be used in real life. So 6 months is about as long as a trial will last for a sort of an osteoarthritis treatment, for example, which is anything like as long as it might be used. So the same happens in the human world. And also there's thought to be a huge degree of underreporting of adverse effects. I mean, no different. And I've heard, the figure of 10% quoted for both veterinary and human. So it is thought to be the same. So, there's relatively the same problems, and, not having time to report, becoming complacent, not reporting the effects of older drugs and so on. So I don't think, obviously the numbers are just smaller in the veterinary world than the human world. So probably there is relatively kind of less information, I would say, probably.
Yeah, and I think that's no one's fault. Like I want to put the vet sector in a good light here. This is nobody's fault that things are done on a smaller scale. It's a smaller service industry, and that's why it should be a collaborative approach to ensuring this data is the responsibility of sharing data is shared between owner and the vet professional or the vet team. Next question.
As well, I think it's worth thinking as well about, many drugs are marketed, not just here, but in, other countries in the world. And, the information about the drug will be collected from all over the world. It's not just what we do here in the UK.
This question, which is a very pertinent. I'm listening from South Africa. Are the adverse effect reporting channels country specific or drug specific? I think you've just kind of answered that one, really, haven't you?
They are country specific. Most countries will have their own what we call pharmacovigilance is the term for the sort of science of monitoring drug safety, and most countries will have their own pharmacovigilance system. So we've got our own now. We used to be part of the European Unions, but now we
another thing
on our own now. And in the States it's the FDA, and I'm sure there's one in.
But they share data, don't they?
Well, yeah, they'd be looking at each other. Yes. I mean, I don't know to what extent. Of course, it makes sense to do that.
Because you told, before we went live, you were saying, well, there's new material coming out in the European.
Yeah.
Is it EMA?
The European Medicines Agency.
Yeah. So they're a bit ahead of the game with data about Librela. They're pushing for publication of that, and then others will follow suit. Is that?
I should think so. Yes, because it just makes it makes sense to do that.
I'm going to grab this question before I lose it. As an owner of an MDR1 collie, how reliable are SPCs?
Yes, well, well, that is something in particular that that's another thing about the sort of variation in drug effect in different individuals, because there are many different breeds of dogs, and they will sometimes there will be differences in the way they will handle drugs. And collie type dogs are an example, because they have I won't be able to remember the very specific details of this. They lack a particular enzyme which would, if it was there, would stop drugs maybe getting into the brain.
Yeah.
So they're a bit more susceptible to certain types of drugs. But I know, for example, with parasiticides, there are certain parasiticides to which those types of dog breeds may be more susceptible. But that is something that that's a very well recognized thing, and that is something that the regulator would be looking for, and certainly that for the parasiticides, for the parasiticides for which that is relevant, that is something that the pharmaceutical companies are expected to study and look for, and I they usually mention collie type dogs, but they for all the ones that I'm aware of, they all the SPCs say something like at the doses at which the drugs are licensed, that they are safe in those types of drugs. But obviously, if a dog had an overdose of that type of thing, of that type of drug, then a dog of that breed would be more susceptible to its effects.
But
That is something that regulators look out for in particular.
Yeah, and would that be like in the contraindication section as well, rather
Well, it
than?
might be in the contract, but I know that it's the macrocyclic lactone type parasiticides like moxidectin and milbemycin. And usually they're not contraindicated. There isn't anything because they are safe to use in at the normal doses in those breeds of dogs. But there'll be something in the precautions saying, that certain dogs are a bit more susceptible to take care. But you should.
Well, that kind of that leads into question 12. How can people use the data prior to starting their dog on a medication? I think you're kind of covering it really nicely there, in that don't be scared of the SPC.
No.
Open it up, unfold that ridiculous folded piece of paper.
Unfortunately, I mean, I think it's a good place to say here that the information that's provided with in the package is not very user friendly, unfortunately.
It's intimidating.
In this country, for human medicines, the package leaflet is required by law to be readable by a lay audience, and it's actually tested with real patients to make sure that people understand what the information is saying. But there's no such requirement for veterinary information, and so unfortunately the package leaflet tends to be just a repeat of the summary of product characteristics, which is a highly technical document with very technical language, and it isn't very well laid out and doesn't sort of present the information you probably
and it can be in multiple languages, so it becomes even more intimidating.
So they're not very helpful in that way, because they're not very well necessarily.
People could use NOAA, so I use it a lot.
The same thing, yes, but it's the same thing. NOAA is just another. Is just a company that presents SPC information. It's the same.
I'm just thinking if somebody's got some medication and they haven't had an SPC.
They can go online. The nice thing about the way that NOAA presented is that it's not in a you can look at the section, you can find the section you want to read, rather than having to sort of wade your way through
the paper of intimidation. So
that is a good suggestion.
NOAH and then the drug, it will come up, and on the left hand side you've got your tabs where you can just jump to where you need to be, become less frustrated by the small print.
So have a look at it, read through what those are the reported effects. They're not definitely, they're reported with the sort of frequencies, and most side effects are not very common. And then also read the precaution section and the contraindications.
And if you, I think Lynn brings up a really relevant point that fits in with this kind of next section, is that we've got to remember many people that are managing OA are already embracing a multimodal approach, not just lifestyle, exercise, weight loss, but there might be a number of medications, and there might be a number of more naturopathic approaches all being added together in one big cauldron. So being able to talk to your vet and say, we're changing drugs, just giving you the heads up, dog's currently on this, I'm not training you how to do your job, but just in case you didn't know and something was contraindicated, don't be shy. We have a booklet that many people might like to know about. It's called the OA booklet. You can get it from the shop. It's designed like a vaccination card, so that when you go in and see your vet practitioner, you've got it written down, what drugs, what doses, what the body weight is, what supplements you're on, and it's just there presented. So it gives that vet a really easy opportunity to quickly scan and check that their advice is in line with what you're already doing. So don't be shy to talk about what you're concurrently doing. You're doing it at the same time.
I think so in that question that CBD and turmeric were mentioned, and I think that's useful, because a lot of people think that the side effects of drugs are sort of frightening and so on. Drugs are dangerous because of that. But the thing is that the licensed drugs we use are very well studied, and that's why we know that those things can happen, and that's why they're listed in the package information leaflet and so on. With unregulated things like CBD and turmeric, for example, if CBD is unregulated, but in the clinical trials that have been done, it appears that effects on liver enzymes appear to be pretty consistent, and the same with turmeric. I've seen reports recently where turmeric information about the adverse effects on turmeric in humans have been reported, and if there was a leaflet to go with turmeric, that would say things like can cause heart rhythm problems, can cause liver toxicity. But we know so much less about those, but it doesn't mean that they don't.
Yeah, because there's no regulation. There's no way to report. There's no one keeping an eye. There's no big brother.
Exactly.
And I think it's fair to say, if you're wanting something to work, if it's going to work, it could have a side effect.
Yeah, because if it's doing something, it's probably doing, it can do other things as well.
So going on to a more practical thing for the last 10 minutes, if an owner thinks that their dog is having an adverse event, let's put the reporting aside, that they know that they will do now. But say somebody's at home and they're listening now with their iPad, and they're going, do you know what, he's had mucoid stools for the last 3 days, or do you know what, he's really started behaving strangely since my vet changed that drug 2 weeks ago, or actually he's been off his food a little bit since we changed the dose rate. Now the person's sitting there going, I don't know what to do. What would you advise that they do? It's like a first line approach.
Talk to your vet is the thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. Don't be shy, guys. Pop an email, phone up, pop in and see them, and just get that information down on your clinical notes, because it is important. It is really important. And please do consider, doing a report yourself. It would be really good for future generations. We shouldn't do anecdotes, but I'm going to make you do it. In your amazing career, have you had drugs that came on the market, everybody was like, woohoo, it's going to be amazing, and then over time you're like, oh, maybe not so good, and vice versa? Is that quite common?
I'll do the vice versa first, because that isn't very common. So that's something coming on the market which had side effects, and then it became okay. I can only think of one example of that, and I can't think of any examples for these in the veterinary field, by the way. These are all in the human field, because there are many more drugs there. But there was a drug that came on the market about 30, 40 years ago called Captopril, which is used to reduce blood pressure. And when it first came out, people would take it and they'd be falling over. And that was because the dose that was used initially was too high.
Yeah.
But then when they realized that was happening, and then then they started to use a smaller dose, and everything was okay then. And that drug stayed on the market and was useful.
I can remember there was a drug called Zubrin that got pulled, not because of adverse events, but the adverse event of never being able to get it into your dog because it stuck to your finger as you were trying to push it into the mouth. That's such a high wastage rate. They were like, this isn't working.
Yeah. Well, that could have been the company withdrawing it from the market, which is not the same as something being withdrawn for safety reasons, which is different. So on that point, in the human world, many drugs, and many that I've known, have come on the market and then been withdrawn a few years later because they've been they had safety problems. And actually I saw there was an interesting study recently that studied over a 20-year period all the drugs kind of in the world that have been withdrawn for safety reasons, and there were 133 of them. And
what kind of period?
Over between 1990 and 2010.
Oh wow.
133 drugs were withdrawn, and the average time between the drug being introduced and being withdrawn for safety reasons was 20 years. So that's a long time, isn't it? So there we go. And the most common reason was liver toxicity, and then heart toxicity, and then sort of allergy. But the sources of information for drug withdrawal was spontaneous reports or case reports. So that shows how important it is that
Definitely.
adverse effects are reported.
Yeah, no, definitely. Wow, 133 in 20 years. 20 years is a long time, though, and we're making huge
Yeah.
progression.
I mean, there are loads of new human
Yeah.
drugs coming out.
Okay.
I don't know of any veterinary drugs that's happened to, actually.
No.
I mean, things have been taken off because, you know, there's space of there were some drugs for horses have been taken off, but that's because of one of the excipients, or you know, the inactive ingredients in there, because it was found because it might end up in human food.
Yeah.
It might have an effect on them.
I wonder what happened to Slentrol. Do you remember Slentrol?
No, what's it?
You're going to look up this later because you
I
always
love
need to know everything.
I don't know. I'm not very familiar with trade names. You know,
Oh, so Slentrol was a weight loss drug for dogs. It was.
Oh, really? There was there've been several weight loss drugs that have been taken off the market. The human weight loss drugs have been taken off the market, actually.
I can remember reading the SPC on it, and supposedly people were taking it because they wanted weight loss and their heads were swelling or something ridiculous.
Oh, right.
But no, that was around for a couple of years, and then it disappeared.
Oh no. Oh, I'll look that up, and I don't know about that.
Or you can tell me what you find out.
Yeah.
Okay, so trying to leave on a more lighter note, because there is a very, very serious endpoint to this, is that we don't want people to be inhibited in doing great stuff for their dogs by fear of adverse events. And this is really, really common. I'm going to tell you a little story, which is quite a nice one. I was doing a trade fair, like a little market fair at a local Essex village. And CAM was right in its infancy then. And this lady came up to me, she said, "Do you know what? Thank you." And I was like, "I don't know who you are, but thank you for saying thank you." And she said, "Well, I was watching your Facebook page," and that's when we just had Facebook. I think there was maybe a website, but not likely. And she said, "You've given me the confidence to trust my vet and to use something that I was absolutely adamant I wasn't going to. And the results been amazing. My dog's got his life back." And I think there is definitely a cohort of people that are in fear to the point it's inhibitory, rather than thinking, I'm going to be sensible, I'm going to be wise, I'm going to be very observational, I'm going to work with my vet, I'm going to monitor, I'm going to, make sure that I've done all the baseline work. But there are some people that really do find it hard. What would you advise?
Well, there's a funny thing about medicines, the information that we're given about medicines, because the product information will only talk about, the benefit. They don't say how likely the benefit is. Whereas for the side effects, it always comes with percentages. So if you thought about, how likely is my dog to benefit from this? Well, it's very likely to benefit because, drugs only come onto the market if they've, really been shown in clinical trials to have an effect in kind of, most drugs. So most animals, a high proportion of animals. So when you set that against the usually small chance of side effects, you're missing out.
That's such a good point.
Side effects and on the benefit. I mean, using medicines any sort of treatment is about a trade-off, but you want a benefit, and there might be a risk of side effects, and we've got information to tell us how likely that is. So I think you have to get things in perspective, really. And
I love that. I've never ever thought of that, but you're absolutely right. The SPCs are very biased towards negativity. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I'm not sure if I'm going to get the data exactly right, and you'll correct me, which is fine. But something for people to think about is that a placebo effect in chronic pain management, OA, is around about 30%, isn't it? 30% of dogs will improve with very little intervention. But for something to be classed as effective, you're having to hit 60 to 70% of dogs have to improve. Is that the right figures?
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think about that, that's a big difference. So, 30 dogs out of 100, if you do nothing, they kind of tick on, they'll show signs of improving because arthritis waxes and wanes. But for intervention to be considered successful, beneficial, and to be advised, 70% of those dogs have to improve. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think let's leave definitely on a very positive note that the SPCs will play on your negative brain where they should fill also with positivity. Something that I would like to say, because I see this a lot in the line of my work and with people that are inhibited about using medications, is in the case of osteoarthritis, no effect is an adverse event in my books. So if you're choosing to do nothing and the dog remains in pain, that is not an unwanted effect, isn't it?
An unwanted effect of the treatment, of
the choice of doing nothing.
The choice, yes, because you're not. There's no improvement. So
no, and people don't often think like that. A lot of people will just be inhibited by potential adverse events.
Yes. So I'm not going to give the dog the possibility of benefiting from this treatment in case there's a lesser chance of it having a side effect.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So on that note, we're going to just give. Can we do 10 top tips? Like 10 seconds each. I'm starving. I actually haven't eaten dinner yet. I'm still at work. So let's do 10 top tips. Number 10, and it can be anything related to OA. I'm not going to restrict you to pharmaceutical adverse events, okay?
All right. Well, I've got 5 written down here, and I don't know.
Have you?
I wrote them a long time ago, so.
Okay. Oh, damn it. Okay, well, I'm going to go in quick and get the biggie, weight loss. Number 10.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, my first one is ask your vet questions about the treatment to understand the most about it, including what to look out for and to know whether it's to know how to know it's working. Basically.
Love it. Number 8 for me, use your veterinary nursing team. Becoming more and more aware of owners not realizing that you've got these amazing professionals that are potentially able to give you a bit more time. Number 7 for you.
7, yeah. Ask if there's anything you should know about how to give the medicine with food. So, for example, Grapipant or Galliprant needs to be given on an empty stomach, whereas Daxocox needs to be given with food.
Very good. I like it.
It doesn't matter.
So number 6 from me is have a chart on your fridge, because the amount of families that overdose or underdose because they job share intermittently. So either have the pill guardian or make sure that you have a clearly demonstrable way of whether something's being given or not for the whole family to see. Number 5.
Well, I want to say always read the package leaflet, but recognizing that, it's sometimes not very easy to read, or go to NOAA and look at the relevant sections there.
Definitely. Number 4, see the benefit of routine screening. It's a lot of people feel really uncomfortable. A lot of veterinary professionals feel uncomfortable suggesting to owners doing bloods and urine and stuff. And I think it's just a case of having the confidence and the lingo to demonstrate the benefits to that animal. And owners, if your vet does suggest a blood screen or a urine screen, we're doing it for your dog's best interest, because their situation may be changing where a medication may no longer be the right choice for them. Number 3.
Report side effects you notice to your vet and encourage them to report it, or you can do it too. And even if they're well-known side effects.
Good, I like it. Number 2 for me, which is very relevant now, is keep warm, guys. The amount of people that are walking around in the freezing weather, your dog is also going to be not adjusted to this changing weather. The ice is a nightmare, and I hate slippery floors. You know that, all of you know that. So please take extra care of the environment and the temperature that we're currently living in. Number one.
Oh, I don't have another one.
Oh, come on.
I don't think so. Well, I have got another one, but I wasn't sure. I tried to find reliable, independent source of information on medicines.
I love it. I love
Something's
it.
free, because nothing is free. Ask yourself who's paying for it and why.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Zoe Belshaw did an amazing piece, didn't she, for Hill's Global Symposium. I think it was 2017. And she said, if you're not paying for something, guys, you are the product. You are being pushed around the internet until you're useful, either as clickbait or eventually buying something somewhere else. So be very, very astute to the information that you read. Check its validity. It's coming to the end of the day. I mean, it works its half eight. Right. Thank you for joining us. It's so lovely to have you. It's really, really great. Please say thank you to Andrea for being here. It's always nice for us to see people being extremely grateful for our time. So please do say thank you to her. We have a couple more Facebook Lives before Christmas, so don't tune off. So please do stay looking at the events page. Maybe Lynn can tell us who's on next, because I can't remember. But until then, we hope that you have a lovely festive period. Take care, guys.
Happy Christmas. Yeah. Bye. Bye-bye.